fine. Yeah. Let's go ahead and open in prayer. If Wyatt, if you would lead us.
Lord, thank you for this day.
Praise you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Blessing us.
What's taking place in this end time, Lord, I pray that you would have your hand to teach us going forth, that we would learn, and we take what we learn here and share it with others, so that they too might believe when they see these things come to pass. We give you thanks and praise in Jesus' name.
Amen. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about the Sixth Trumpet War, which is going to be World War III. The prophecies found in Revelation chapter 9, verses 13 through 19. I'm going to read just a few verses at a time and then make comment. We're going to start with verses 13 through 15. It says there, "And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men." There are other translations that say the third part of mankind. If you want to put up our map for the Euphrates River. The Euphrates River runs through four Arab nations. It starts up in Turkey, goes through Syria and Iraq, and then the last miles of it is bordering both Iraq and Iran before it empties into the Persian Gulf. Now, the war that's being talked about here is going to kill a third of the world's population. That's roughly 2.5 billion people. And that is more than World War I and World War II combined by far. Whether they'll all die at once, and we'll have that many dead at the end of the war, I question that. This is likely to be a nuclear war, and there'll probably be a continuation of people dying in the months and years thereafter from radiation poisoning and radiation-induced cancer. That's what happened at Chernobyl. There were still people dying 30 years later. Okay, let's go to verse 16. It says there, "And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them." That 1,000 means it's 200 million. Now, China is the only country that has an army that large. If you look it up on a Google search, I double-checked it just a couple days ago to make sure it hadn't all changed, it will come up with China, 200 million. So it's got the exact number that the Bible talks about. This summer, China signed a strategic partnership with the Palestinian Authority. And soon after that, the Chinese leader was told by one of his top advisors that China needs to start 4 wars that the United States would become involved in. He said that Russia-Ukraine war can be one of them, because we're already very involved in that one. He said China should then encourage a couple more wars, and then they could go after Taiwan, making a 4th. They want to spread the United States so thin that we wouldn't be able to stop them from taking Taiwan. When I heard that the first time, I was only halfway listening, and it was repeated later that day, and when they said 4 wars, that just jumped out at me like, oh my, could that have something to do with the 4 angels? If they're involved with the Palestinian Authority at this point, and if they have encouraged and stirred up this war that has started with Israel, they may just keep contributing and getting more and more people involved. So, it could be, we always knew it was going to start from the Euphrates River area, but we also know from the number in the army that China's going to be highly involved in this war. Let's go on to verses 17 through 19. It says, "And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as heads of lions. And out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like serpents and had heads, and with them they do hurt." Now this is all symbolic language because this was written by John 2,000 years ago when he's looking at a vision of the future. He's never seen any of these things before. He doesn't know what a missile is. He doesn't know what a tank is or a missile launcher or any of that kind of stuff because they didn't have them back then. When men went to war back in those days, they rode horses. And so he's seeing a war taking place, so he's seeing these vehicles and he doesn't know what to call them, so he's talking about horses and horseback riders. He spoke also about the tails being like serpents. We have envisioned that what he may be seeing there are missiles. If you watch a missile as it's shot up into the sky, there'll be a trail of smoke behind it. And so possibly that's what he's trying to describe when he says a tail like a serpent. The big question right now is this the sixth trumpet war that's starting? It is looking that way. It very well could be, but on the other hand, it may not be. We are not sure yet. Ever since the war started on October 7th, it has escalated each day. And end time, after about a week, became pretty concerned about what was going on and started focusing heavily on it, and they've started talking about making preparations and such. But we do not know for sure just yet. Only time will tell. If you want to go ahead and put up our next map, this is a map of Israel, and I don't know if you can see the labels on there. Hamas and Hezbollah, if you've been listening to the news at all, you know that they are involved. Those two are just two of the militia groups that fight for Iran. Hezbollah is in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas is in the Gaza Strip, and Hezbollah is up in the north in Lebanon. Iran has a network of these militia groups that are all around Israel's borders. They call it the Ring of Fire. These groups receive millions of dollars, training, and weapons from Iran. And so when you hear about these different groups fighting with Israel, it's ultimately coming all from Iran. Now, before I go on, I just want to interject a little something here that I want you to be aware of. There are several countries spoken of in the Bible that are going to be playing a part during the tribulation years and in the Armageddon War. And that's further down the road in the future. And so there's at least 8 or 10 of them that I could name that are going to still be around. Now that doesn't mean they're not going to get hit and lose some population, but they're not going to get like totally wiped out. They're still going to have a government, they're still going to be having a military and so forth. And Russia is one of those countries. The United States is one of those countries. There's also Iran, which in the Bible is called Persia. There is Turkey and Egypt, Jordan, There's several of them in there. You can read about some of them in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and in Revelation chapter 12 is where it tells about the United States being there during the tribulation, caring for Israel. It's interesting, though, that with as big a part as China seems to be playing in the world, the Bible never mentions China. The only real connection that we have is that 200 million man army. All your other countries are either named by name or by their symbol. And China's just not in there. The only dragon the Bible talks about is Satan. So at end time, Brother Baxter had always felt that China would play a big part in this war. So we're guessing that China may be the one that gets hit the hardest. And let me tell you why. If you took the entire continent of North America, all the way from top to bottom, that's going to include Canada and Mexico and everything in between, and you also took all of the countries of the Middle East, and you also took all of the countries of Europe, and you put all of them together, you would still not have 1/3 of the world's population. So there has to be a large population center somewhere that's going to get hit hard in order for 1/3 of the world, to be killed in this war. And there are only 2 countries that have extra large populations. China is one of them. India is the other, but we don't really think India is going to be the one because there's just not as much hostility type things going on with India as there is with China. There was a report that came out earlier this month from the Strategic Posture Commission. They were tasked by Congress to examine and recommend the long-term strategic posture of the United States. And in their report that just came out a few weeks ago, they said that the United States must prepare for possible simultaneous wars. So in other words, several wars going on at the same time. They gave several recommendations, and then the part that really jumped out at me was when they said, if measures are not taken, the United States will likely have to increase its reliance on nuclear weapons. And that's something that I have been telling my husband for the last 3 or 4 months. Every time I hear one of these reports coming out that our military is not up to par and our weaponry is not where it should be, I keep turning to Dave and saying, this is why it's going to turn nuclear, because we're going to have to depend on the nuclear weapons. Ever since the war started in Israel, the media has been talking about 2 specific things. They've been talking about World War III, and they've been talking about the 2-state solution. Now, World War III is what we've just been talking about, and I don't know if everybody is familiar with the 2-state solution, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. The 2-state solution has to do with a peace agreement or peace treaty that will create 2 states side by side in the Middle East. One will be for the Palestinians. The other is Israel, and what they want to do is make permanent borders there to where Israel will be recognized by all countries, because right now everybody doesn't. It also will create a sharing arrangement on the Temple Mount when this is brought about. And we know that from Revelation chapter 11, where John was told to measure the temple but not measure the outer court, because that would be given to the Gentiles. So on the Temple Mount is 35 acres. And on the Temple Mount right now, you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, which are the holy places of the Arabs. But there is, over to one end, there's a big open area that is large enough for Israel to build their temple. So that's what we expect to happen. Some people have said, well, they're going to have to tear down those other buildings, but no, there's enough room. They won't have to do that. The two states have been talked about for several years, and they always refer to it as the two-state solution. Most of the world leaders have been in the news recently talking about this. It is in the Bible. The Bible talks about it in Daniel chapter 9. It calls it the confirmation of the covenant. Now, the covenant there is the promise that God gave to Israel, or to Abraham, that the land of Israel would always belong to his descendants forever. And the confirmation is what Daniel was seeing as a future event, because the Antichrist is the one described there. It says that the Antichrist will confirm the covenant with many for a 7-year period of time. Now, and that's in verse 27 of chapter 9. There's 3 things about that I want to point out. First of all, we will probably not know who the Antichrist is at that time. Years ago, they used to teach that verse by saying the Antichrist will confirm a covenant for 7 years. They'd leave out the middle part of that verse. It says, with many. And that with many is a key, because what is likely to happen is that this is going to take place at the UN in the aftermath of this war. People are going to be so outraged by what has happened, so devastated by what has happened, that there will be a demand for the two-state solution to bring all this conflict to an end that's been going on between Israel and the Palestinians for the last 56 years. And so they're going to push this issue. The Antichrist will be somewhere among them. He won't be the only one confirming this covenant. And so we may not know who he is yet at that time. The Bible does not say that he is revealed until the abomination of desolation, which happens 3.5 years later. Like I say, that it will probably take place at the UN, and all the world leaders will be there to confirm it. And then the one other thing I wanted to point out, when it tells us that this is going to be confirmed for 7 years, that 7 years is not an unusual thing. There was another similar peace agreement that happened in the 1990s. It was called the Oslo Accords. And that was also for 7 years. The reason that some of these treaties are not permanent, and they only do them for a time span, is because most of the time they can get agreement on maybe 80 or 90% of the things, but they can't get full agreement on everything. And so they will say, well, look, we're going to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're going to go ahead and do this thing. We'll do it for 7 years, and then we will come back and we will discuss this other issue and try to get it straightened out at that point. Well, that's what's going to happen with this two-state solution. They're going to press Israel and the Palestinians to do this two-state solution. They're going to incorporate the sharing arrangement on the Temple Mount. But the one thing that's going to be a sticking point that they cannot get settled is that the Palestinians want part of Jerusalem as their capital. They want the east part. And Israel will never divide Jerusalem. Jerusalem is God's city. He said in the Old Testament 37 times, I will put my name there. And so this is something that Israel's never going to do. But they want to get this peace thing going, so it's going to be a 7-year deal. Well, just to jump ahead, a little bit to just remind you what's going to take place. As that 7 years is starting to come to a close, they are going to learn that Israel is still not going to budge on this issue. And so that at that point, the Antichrist and his world government armies are going to be brought together in a coalition that will be led by Russia and come down against Israel for the Battle of Armageddon. The whole point of that war is to take the city of Jerusalem by force. They come down to the plain of Megiddo, the war starts there. They end up going down through the Jordan Valley and turn inward toward the city of Jerusalem. They do take the city and they do capture the Israelis. This is in the Bible. And at that point, that is what triggers the return of Jesus. We will have been raptured just a little bit before that, and then we will come back with him to finish that war, and then the millennial kingdom will begin. Now, I want to go over a quick update with about the red heifer, if you want to put that picture up. Israel has to have the ashes of a red heifer that's without spot or blemish in order to cleanse themselves from ritual impurities. It has to do with an Old Testament law, and they go by the Old Testament, not the New Testament, so they feel they have to do this. Israel has only had 9 red heifers in its history, and the last one was 2,000 years ago during the early church. Israel was scattered after that, and they didn't become a nation again until 1948. They began to look for the coming of a red heifer at that point, but there really wasn't much talk about it, and they didn't really find one until, it's probably been in the last 5 to 10 years. I can't remember when the first one was that they started talking about it. But the ones that they found back then ended up becoming disqualified before they reached the age that they had to be sacrificed. Somewhere along the way, there was a ranch in Texas that learned about Israel wanting these red heifers, and they had a lot of red cows. So they decided that they were going to try to breed these cows in such a way that they could produce a red heifer for Israel. Well, a couple of years ago, they had 21 of these red heifers born. And they picked out 5 of their best ones, and they shipped them over to Israel. This happened not this past September, a month ago, but last September in 2022. Now, the Temple Institute has them and is taking care of them, and the rabbis are going in and inspecting them periodically to make sure they're still qualified. As of right now, the last I heard, 1 of them has been disqualified. The other 4 are still qualified. So if at least 1 of those is still qualified by next spring, they will be of the right age. They expect that probably somewhere around the time of Passover might be the time that they would be looking at doing the sacrifice and burning the cow for the ashes. Now, I want to encourage everybody to share these prophecies with people quickly. Don't wait till they happen. Do it before they happen, because that's the example that Jesus set for us. In John 14:29, and I don't have the scripture in there for this, but Jesus was speaking, and he said, I have told you before it comes to pass, so that when it comes to pass, you might believe. Using prophecy like this will cultivate belief in the heart of an unbeliever. So if you have friends, family, anybody that you know, coworkers or whoever, that maybe they don't even go to church, maybe they don't even believe in God. If you want to help cultivate some belief in their hearts, tell them about these prophecies, because when they see them come to pass, there will be a good chance that God will start to deal with their hearts. I also want to point out, this is one of my little pet peeves. If you get your news from any of the main news sources, the ones that have been popular and been around for years and years, like CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and, all the main ones, if you're getting your news from those sites, you are filling your head with lies and propaganda. And I am not exaggerating. It has gotten worse and worse and worse until it's at a point now where if somebody says yes, they tell you they said no. I mean, they'll tell you just the opposite. Let me just tell you quickly why this is happening. There are only 6 companies that own all of these news places across the United States. And they are funded by 15 globalist billionaires around the world. These men are globalists, meaning that they are all for socialism, they're all for world government, they're all for all of the agenda, what do they call it? The sustainable development stuff that I have talked about before. They're in favor of all of that. They want all the countries to give up their sovereignty and have a world government in charge of everything, because then the elites can be in power. And so they are funding all the media. And if the reporters do not spread their lies, they get fired. And if you've noticed, I don't know if you have, I'm in the news all the time, so I know these things. There have been several who have been fired recently because they have, gotten convicted about this, and they don't want to keep spreading these lies because they know they're not true. I have on your paper 3 recommendations. I have a lot more. A lot of these news sites are places you're probably not familiar with, but they're good ones, and you can rely on what they're saying. If you like to read articles, go to Breitbart. If you'd rather have video, you can either go to Real America's Voice or to the Victory News, which is a Christian news station. Breitbart, go to America's Voice, or not Breitbart, Real America's Voice. If you type in americasvoice.news, it'll take you right to the page where their video is going to come up. And then for the Victory News, if you go to the Victory Channel Facebook page, scroll down their posts and you'll see all the videos for the Victory News. Now, I want to encourage everybody to make sure that you are where you need to be in your walk with God, because we don't know for sure exactly how this is going to play out. It was always Brother Baxter's belief that the United States would get hit with some nuclear bombs. He did feel that we would probably lose, I've heard him say, anywhere from 25 to 50,000, or no, maybe it was 25 to 50 million people, because he figured that a lot of the large cities would be targeted. I've done a lot of research on this, and the military normally will first go after 3 things. They'll go after the government, they'll go after your communications centers, and they'll go after where you have your missiles and your military equipment, your planes and such. They usually target places like that first before they start hitting population centers. We don't know. You know, if this ends up the United States hitting China and China hits back, we don't know for sure how accurate their bombs are. Maybe they're shooting for a particular city and it goes off course a little bit. So we don't know what's going to happen. So just be sure that you are where you need to be with God. And just remember, if it happens, it's just a quick trip to heaven. So don't feel bad. And secondly, I want to point out that if we make it through this war, pray and ask God what He would have you do to prepare for what's coming, because we don't really know what the aftermath is going to be like. We know that when the pandemic came around, you'd go to the store and it was like, wow, you know, where's the toilet paper and where's this and where's that, you know. This happens in Florida every year during hurricane season. They go and they wipe out the stores. We don't know what we're going to be facing. We don't know if the supply chain is going to be disrupted. We don't know if we're going to have electricity. So pray about that and ask God what He would have you do to prepare. If you're interested to know more about the end-time prophecies, I taught on all of them a couple of years ago, and those videos are available on, if you go to our church Facebook page and go to the videos and just scroll down a little bit, you'll see them all posted there and you can go back through them. Or if you have friends or family or somebody that would be interested to see them, then you can point them in that direction. That is all I have for tonight, so I want to open this up for questions. If anybody has any questions on what we covered tonight, feel free to ask them now.